The aircraft carrying the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge descended through the clear Caribbean sky, preparing to land in Belize. Inside, Prince William and his wife Catherine were likely reviewing their final notes, a mixture of excitement and duty propelling them forward. This tour of the Caribbean was not just another overseas visit, it was a significant undertaking, carefully planned to commemorate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The itinerary promised a charm offensive, a chance for the young popular couple to connect with the Commonwealth realms on behalf of the Crown. They were ready to showcase the modern face of the monarchy, to celebrate shared history, and to look toward a vibrant, collaborative future. The warm tropical air that greeted them as they stepped off the plane felt like a welcome embrace. But beneath the surface of this carefully orchestrated beginning, the ground was already beginning to shift in ways they could not have anticipated. As they settled into their accommodations, the first signs of trouble began to ripple through the communication lines from the planned first engagement. They were due to visit a sustainable cocoa farm in the village of Indian Creek, a perfect example of eco-friendly enterprise that aligned with William's conservation interests. However, the local indigenous Quechua Maya community had a very different perspective. For them, the visit was not an honor, but an intrusion. A long-running, deeply painful dispute over communal land rights with a conservation charity for which William served as patron had poisoned the well. The villagers felt disrespected, claiming they had not been consulted about the royal helicopter landing on their football field, a central piece of community land. To them, this was not a diplomatic mission. It was a painful echo of colonial-era high-handedness. The reaction was swift and unequivocal. Villagers gathered, not with placards of welcome, but with banners reading, "Prince William, leave our land." A community leader voiced the raw sentiment, describing the planned visit as colonialism and a slap in the face. For William and Kate, the news hitting their private office must have been a shock. Their aim was to build bridges, but here they were, and the central figures in a protest before they had even set foot on the soil for their first official event. There was no choice. With a heavy heart, Kensington Palace was forced to announce the cancellation of the visit. It was an inauspicious, deeply public start. The carefully planned narrative was already fraying at the edges, replaced by headlines about colonial legacies and scrapped engagements. The couple, eager to connect, and had instead become symbols of a divide they had hoped to help close. The second part of the journey picked up the pieces after the Belize setback. The couple moved on to Jamaica, a nation whose complex relationship with the British monarchy was about to be laid bare for the world to see. The reception upon their arrival in Kingston was initially a whirlwind of energy. As they drove through the streets, crowds gathered, and there was genuine excitement. But the political and social undercurrents were impossible to ignore. Just hours before their plane landed, demonstrators gathered outside the British High Commission, their banners carrying blunt messages. Princesses and princes belong in fairy tales, not in Jamaica. And a simple, powerful demand: apologize. The calls for reparations for slavery were loud and clear, a stark reminder that for many, the royal visit was not a celebration, but a painful provocation. The tension came to a head during an official engagement. Standing beside the Jamaican Prime Minister, William and Kate listened as he publicly and plainly stated his government's intention to pursue a new path, one that would see the country become a republic and remove the king as head of state. It was a moment of profound diplomatic awkwardness. The couple stood mutely, smiles fixed, as the future of the monarchy in Jamaica was openly questioned in their presence. And the imagery of the tour also began to work against them. In a gesture meant to be a touching tribute, they rode in an open-top Land Rover used by the Queen and Prince Philip during their 1953 visit. Instead of nostalgia, the image was widely branded as tone-deaf, a colonial-era throwback that felt profoundly out of step with the modern, forward-looking message they were trying to convey. Perhaps the most iconic and damaging image of the entire tour came from Trenchtown, a neighborhood in Kingston with a rich cultural history. William and Kate visited a local football pitch, meeting children and young people. William even joined in a game with England striker Raheem Sterling. But the photographs that circled the globe told a different, crueler story. Tightly cropped images showed the couple pressing their fingers through a wire mesh fence to touch the outstretched hands of local children on the other side. Without context, and it looked like a scene from a wildlife park, a visual metaphor for a privileged elite reaching into a world from which they were securely separated. Social media exploded with accusations of a white savior parody. The joy of the actual engagement was completely obliterated by a public relations disaster, a single moment that came to define the entire trip in the eyes of many. The return to the United Kingdom was not a homecoming of relief, but the beginning of a difficult reckoning, and the 8-day tour, intended to be a triumph, had been beset by protests, diplomatic rebukes, and public relations pitfalls. For William, the weight of it all was immense. According to insiders, he returned totally deflated. The man who was one day to be king felt his reputation and the future of the institution he represented hanging in the balance. The failure was not just a matter of bad luck, it felt systemic. Almost immediately upon their return, William called for a clear-the-air meeting with their senior staff. The atmosphere in the room was described as tense and soured. William was frustrated, expressing concerns about the many pitfalls that could have been avoided. He felt there had been a lack of foresight and a failure to provide workable solutions from the very people tasked with guiding them. He knew, with a heavy certainty, that the blame for these very public failures would ultimately land on his shoulders. And this moment of crisis, however, also became a catalyst for a profound shift in their approach. The conversations in those post-tour meetings were not just about assigning blame, but about forging a new path forward. If William wanted to be seen as a modernizer, a leader for a new era, he realized he needed to get his own house in order. And the couple and their team began to strategize on how to modernize the image of the firm, learning hard lessons about cultural sensitivity and the need to be more in tune with a rapidly changing world. The Caribbean tour, for all its sorrow and embarrassment, became a brutal but essential education. It was a public undressing that forced them to confront the gap between the monarchy's traditional playbook and the expectations of a post-colonial global audience. They were determined that such a mistake would not be made again. The sorrow of the Caribbean tour, however, would soon be eclipsed by a far more personal and devastating arrival. The year 2024 began with a semblance of normality. But by mid-January, the world learned that the Princess of Wales had undergone major abdominal surgery. She spent nearly 2 weeks recovering in the London clinic before returning home to Windsor to recuperate. The palace issued carefully worded statements, asking for privacy and indicating she would not be undertaking public duties until after Easter. But behind the closed doors of Adelaide Cottage, a quiet terror was unfolding. It was during this period of home recovery that Catherine and William received news that would shatter their world. Post-surgery tests had revealed the presence of cancer. The advice was immediate. She must begin a course of preventative chemotherapy. For William, the news was like being hit by a bus. Just everything changed in an instant. Just a month earlier, he had grappled with the news of his own father, King Charles, being diagnosed with cancer. Now his wife, the mother of his 3 young children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, was facing the same fight. Friends later recounted his state of disbelief, a profound and numbing shock. The ground beneath him vanished, replaced by a heartbreak, fear, and helplessness that was almost impossible to articulate. He had to be the pillar of strength. But inside, he was reeling. His devotion to Catherine became his anchor. He took charge of the school runs, a quiet, determined figure dropping his children off, trying to maintain a sense of routine and normalcy amidst the chaos. The family cocooned themselves, with Catherine's parents and siblings becoming regular visitors, creating a protective bubble of love and support around the prince and princess and their children. But the decision of how to share this devastating news with the world weighed heavily on them. Inspired by the warmth and support the king had received after his own public announcement, Catherine knew she had to speak. She believed her experience could help others in similar distress. In a recorded video message, sitting on a wooden bench in a serene spring setting, she calmly and bravely told the world of her diagnosis. It was a moment that stopped the globe, and the days leading up to it had been filled with private shock and tears. But in that moment, as a senior courtier described it, the world stood still. For William, watching his wife bare her soul to millions, his role was clear: to stand by her side, to protect her, and to navigate their family through the terrifying and uncertain months of treatment that lay ahead. As Catherine underwent her treatment out of the public eye, William slowly began to resume public duties, and carrying the weight of both his wife's illness and his father's on his shoulders. His appearances were often marked by a new, palpable gravity. At the emotional 80th anniversary commemorations of D-Day in Portsmouth, he stood alongside his father and Queen Camilla, representing the nation in thanking the veterans of the Normandy landings. It was a day of profound national reflection, but for William, it was also deeply personal. As he moved among the elderly veterans, many in wheelchairs, at their chests heavy with medals, the conversation would inevitably turn to his family. One D-Day hero, a man who had witnessed the carnage of Juno Beach, looked up at the prince with concern and asked after his wife, wondering if she was getting better. William's response was a quiet, 6-word sentence that betrayed the depth of his own sorrow. "She'd have loved to be here." It was a simple statement, but it spoke volumes about the gap her absence left, not just in the royal schedule, but in his own heart. In another poignant conversation with a veteran who had served as a codebreaker at Bletchley Park, William found a connection to his wife's own family history. He shared the story of Catherine's grandmother, Valerie, who had also been a Bletchley Park codebreaker, a secret she kept until the end of her life. Catherine only found out at the end of her life, he revealed. In these moments, the public duties became intertwined with private grief and family legacy. And he was not just the heir to the throne, he was a worried husband, a son concerned about his father, and a man trying to hold his family together while honoring the sacrifices of generations past. The cheerful, carefree prince of his youth was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes held the weight of the world and the sorrow of a sick wife at home. By the autumn of 2024, there were signs of hope. Catherine completed her course of preventative chemotherapy, and the family began to cautiously emerge from their protective shell. Their first joint public engagement since her diagnosis was a testament to their shared commitment to service, even in the face of personal adversity. They traveled to Southport, a seaside town still reeling from the horrific knife attack that had claimed the lives of 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. The visit was deeply emotional. They met privately with the families of the victims, with a dance teacher who had been present during the attack, and with emergency service workers who had responded to the scene. It was not a celebration, but an act of shared grief, a demonstration that the community had not been forgotten. For Catherine, it was a profoundly meaningful step back into the world, a chance to use her position not for pageantry, but for quiet, compassionate human connection. Her unexpected appearance was a powerful signal of her recovery and their united front. And the most recent chapters in their story reveal a couple hardened by experience, ready to protect their family and the crown with a new, steely resolve. The sorrow and struggle of the previous years had forged a stronger bond and a clearer sense of purpose. This was never more publicly evident than at the funeral of the Duchess of Kent in late 2025. The somber occasion brought the family together, including Prince Andrew, who had been stripped of his titles and was facing intense public scrutiny and a police investigation. As the royal family gathered on the cathedral steps, the body language was impossible to miss. Andrew, grinning broadly and seemingly trying to strike up a jovial conversation, stood next to a visibly uncomfortable William. The prince's reaction was a masterclass in silent condemnation. He deliberately shielded his mouth with his hand as he spoke, acutely aware of the cameras, and his expression remained stony. According to a lip reader, Andrew's attempts at reminiscing were met with nothing but silence and a dismissive glance. It was a very public scolding from the future king to his disgraced uncle. Catherine, too, played her part in this quiet show of royal solidarity and boundaries. Body language experts noted how she deliberately ignored Sarah, Duchess of York, turning her head away and refusing to engage. She was described as the firm's protective huntress, warding off any unwanted association and standing as a shield for her husband. Behind the scenes, it was reported that William had been a driving force in the decision to distance the family from Andrew, demonstrating a ruthless determination to protect his cancer-stricken father and the institution of the monarchy from further reputational damage. The carefree young man who had once craved normality was now making tough, calculated decisions to ensure the survival of his future crown. Through it all, the family remains the priority. Their concerns now are as much about the king's ongoing health battles as they are about their children. They are navigating a world of intense pressure, with insiders revealing they are itching to speak out on certain matters, but are constrained by ongoing police investigations. William has admitted in public to not being in a calm state, a rare glimpse into the strain. Catherine, even while looking impeccable at public events like the BAFTAs, has shared personal moments of vulnerability, joking about being in floods of tears after watching a play. Their journey has been one of relentless highs and devastating lows, from the majestic arrival in the Caribbean that turned to sorrow, to the crushing arrival of a cancer diagnosis, and finally to a quiet, resilient solidarity. The remarks that once shattered hearts have now given way to a determined silence, on a shared glance and an unbreakable partnership forged in the fire of public failure and private heartbreak. They are no longer just a prince and a princess. They are survivors, protectors, and the architects of a monarchy's uncertain future.